Hello and welcome. This is the Best Cards for series where I take a commander and try and share with you some of the best cards for that particular commander to get you started on building a new deck. I am Brian, the Unskilled Commander. I appreciate you checking out the video. Please do the subscribe, like, all that stuff if you wouldn't mind. Now obviously Magic the Gathering has tens of thousands of cards, so this can't be a comprehensive list, but it's designed to get you started with some very key cards that are best for that particular commander to give it exactly what it needs to get going. Today's episode, Imodane the Pyrohammer. One of my favorite decks, so let's get into it. She is a 4/4 that says whenever an instant or sorcery spell you control that targets only a single creature deals damage to that creature, Imodane deals that much damage to each opponent. So it's pretty straightforward. You're going to want to blast all of your opponent's creatures, thereby allowing Imodane to take that damage and smash it into all of your opponent's faces. So clearly, what you're going to want is high damage spells, instants and sorceries that target creatures. Not every spell has to be some massive amount of damage, and we'll get into that in a second. Some of the best cards that you're going to want to put in Imodane are things like Shivan Meteor. Costs 4 mana to cast, and it deals 13 damage to a target creature. You can also suspend it so that you don't have to have the full 5 mana to get it started. Also, things like Splitting Earth and Seismic Strike both deal damage equal to the number of mountains you control. Seismic Strike costs 3 mana, while Splitting Earth only costs 2. These are great because you can cast them immediately if you have 2 and 3 mana, or you can sit on them and wait until you get a bunch of mountains onto the battlefield before you fire it off, dealing even more damage, hopefully 6-7 damage to a creature. We also have things like Scorching Shot, which deals 5 damage to target creature. And then, of course, you're going to want to put in some of your X spells like Torch the Witness, where it deals twice X damage to target creature. And if excess damage was dealt to that creature this way, you get to investigate, which is great because you're going to need card draw as well. Now, that doesn't mean that you only want giant blast spells, because you are, of course, going to want things like Lightning Bolt and all of your little ones that do 2 damage, 3 damage, because those are going to be cheap enough that you can fire off multiple spells in one turn. However, just your instant and sorcery damage spells aren't going to be enough. To help offset that, we move on to probably our most important section of cards, the doublers, and sometimes even triplers. Things like Gratuitous Violence. If a creature you control would deal damage to a permanent or player, it deals double that damage. Angrath's Marauders is a great one. If a source you control would deal damage to a permanent player, deal double that damage, but it's a 4/4 creature, so that gives you something to block with, and maybe even attack with if the opportunity presents itself. Also, Solifim Mayhem Dominus. If a source you control would deal non-combat damage to an opponent, it deals double that damage instead. You've got Fiery Emancipation. If a source you control would deal damage, it does triple that damage. Along with City on Fire. Same thing, triple damage. Now, those little 2 and 3 blasts are suddenly doing 6 or 9 damage in one shot. So if you are able to fire off 3 of them in a row on one turn, you're going to hit your opponents for massive, massive damage. There are, of course, doublers that affect the entire board, but I would use those at your own risk. Finally, in mono red, you're definitely going to need card draw. So things like Wild Guess, Witch's Mark, Seize the Spoils. Discard a card, but you get to draw 2 cards. You're going to need to constantly replenish your hand if you're firing off all your instant and sorceries in an effort to win the game before all your opponents start swinging at you. Also, things like Jeskai's Will is of course incredibly important in a red deck, and if you have Imodane out, you get both effects. You get to add mana for the cards in a target opponent's hand, and you get to exile the top 3 cards of your library and play them this turn. Also, an honorable mention category would be Mana Rocks. Again, since you're in mono red, you're not going to have much ramp, so things like Soul Ring, Grand Dynamo, Dallion to help to reduce this cost of red spells, those are all going to help propel you forward and make Imodane a threat to be reckoned with. Finally, a couple other key cards that you're definitely going to want to put in Imodane, or at least consider, something like Mizzet's Mastery. Exile target card that's an instant or sorcery from your graveyard. For each card exiled this way, copy it. You may cast the copies without paying its mana cost, and you can overload the spell for 8 mana. That way you can replay all of the instant and sorceries in your graveyard, and sometimes that can be just what you need to get that last batch of massive damage across before someone swings in on lethal for you. And let's say you don't want to wait around. Grafted Exoskeleton. Equipped creature gets +2/+2 and has Infect. Remember how Imodane's worded. Imodane deals the damage to each opponent, which means if she has Infect, gives them poison counters. You only need 10 poison counters to take out an opponent. Those are some of the best cards to put in an Imodane Pyrohammer commander deck, but it's certainly not all of them. What cards do you think should go in Imodane? What cards did I leave out? Let me know in the comments, and I will see you next time.